Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Sked. Thank you for joining us for today's show. We're going to begin with big news about Brexit, of course. That is the breaking news that came out in overnight about European diplomats saying that Brexit deal has been agreed upon and has been announced and finalized. This, of course, has been a long time coming, a hard-fought battle, certainly, and in true Brexit style, it's happened right at the last moment or in the lead up to that 31st of December deadline for this trade deal to then be agreed upon. Both sides have had to concede. The fisheries industry, I believe, in the UK has already come out with a statement saying that it's disappointed in what's been agreed upon, seemingly. And fisheries, as we know, was one very sensitive area during these trade deal negotiations, I should say. What happens next vis-a-vis the economies of both the EU and the UK, of course, are open questions. What kind of a negative and or positive effect will this trade deal have? Have both sides come out genuinely with a win-win situation, as both sides seemingly claim? Let's discuss all of that a bit further. I'm joined by Dr. Gunter Walzenbach, who is a senior lecturer in European politics at the University of the West of England. He's joining us today from Bristol. Joining us today from London on the line is Dr. Sked, who is an emeritus professor of international history at LSE. He's also the founder and former leader of UKIP. Alan and Gunter, thank you both for your time today, especially on Christmas Day. Gunter, let me start with you. What do you make of the Brexit deal and what has come out of it? Has this been worth all this battle?
Well, I mean, potentially you have to ask the people who started that battle whether they consider it worthwhile. It will take a few years, I think, to see ultimately whether the intended purposes or desires have been fulfilled. Under the circumstances, I think it is definitely better than no deal, but whether it really will set the path for new beginnings, that of course remains to be seen in the time ahead. And I think it will be the medium to long term that will show the potential effects of that deal. So it is a bit early to tell, also bearing in mind that the precise details are not that well known in terms of the mechanisms and the precise agreements with regards to different sectors of the economy. So it is a thin deal as it stands. It does not include, for example, financial services. On the other hand, there is assurance that the level playing field will be maintained. So I think both sides had to give and take. But it remains to be seen how it will play out in detail.
Alan, what are your thoughts? Again, we've had, ever since the Brexit referendum, right, we've had people on both sides of the aisle, very varying opinions about whether or not Brexit would be a good thing or not. Now that this has been finalized, will the UK come out stronger?
We're very happy with the deal. As your other guest said, we don't know the exact details yet, and between 1.5 and 2,000 pages of them. But the main points that Brexiteers wanted have been achieved. We're out of the single market, we're out of the common external tariff area. We are not any longer under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. We don't have to follow European regulations on anything. We don't have to pay any money year by year into the European Commission's Great Fund. We're an independent sovereign nation again. We are a sovereign, independent coastal state with control over our waters, and there's a compromise there about fishing, which means that it is going to take 5.5 years. The European Commission originally asked for 14 years. We wanted 3 as a transition period. We've got 5.5, which seems a good compromise from our point of view. And after that, we'll negotiate like normal with the EU fishing fleets on an annual basis. So although the fishing community is disappointed that we didn't take complete control immediately, I think that would have been unrealistic, because our fishing fleet, frankly, isn't big enough at the moment. It has to be built up again after 40 years of the common fisheries policy. Okay. And I think the compromise there is a good one. But the Overall, Boris got what he wanted, and Brexiteers have got what they wanted.
Okay.
We're out of the European Union's clutches. We're not paying into it. We're not under its laws or jurisdiction or under its regulations any longer. We're a free country. And we can now set fare for global Britain. We've already had 3 trade agreements signed with Japan and many other countries.
Indeed.
The next big one, I hope, will be with the United States.
Okay.
And then we'll join the...
If I may come in, Alan, because on that point then, that you just made there about the trade deals with other countries and with other regions, Gunter, I wonder what your thoughts are about that, because the Europeans certainly, I would think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, wanted to make an example, right, out of Britain. At least I would think that that's in the back of their mind, where they wouldn't want any other members to think it's easy to walk away from the EU, for example. Do you think in some ways that the Europeans have been able to achieve that?
Well, I think the process over the last few years, I mean, almost 4 years it took to arrive at a deal, and all the sort of skirmishes and the back and forth and the turmoil it created within British politics to a certain extent. I think, if anything, that made clear to lots of other countries that it is, not such an easy path to take. Whether it sort of, I don't think as Barnier and Ursula von der Leyen have highlighted throughout the negotiations, the EU was remarkably unified, and that, by the way, is also one of the reasons to believe that the sign will be ratified. The deal will be ratified in its current form. In terms of the actual detail, I think Barnier also highlighted that there is the possibility of a sanction mechanism in case there is discretion that this level playing field of competition, if that is not maintained, and the deal does also allow for unilateral action. So, of course, these are the big breaks that exist there. And so far, we don't know whether any of these mechanisms will actually come to the test, but there is that potential, and that should also put off, or at least highlight to others, that there are potential costs if there is no level playing field within the single market.
All right, so Alan, I don't want to connect, apples and oranges, but what happened at the port of Dover, it seemed quite emblematic, symbolic, did it not? Even though it wasn't, of course, in the context of Brexit necessarily, but in the context of the pandemic. And yes, we can probably, I know that there's a lot of people who are critical of the French on the British side, and them closing that border even temporarily at that time. But do you think that all that chaos that erupted there at that port and at that border was sort of symbolic about what may have happened had there not been a deal? I mean, do you think that may have added some pressure, even possibly behind the scenes, on both sides, or more so on the British to come to this deal?
Well, I don't know. There's no real evidence of that. I mean, the negotiations went on and on and on to the very last minute. I think it's a very stupid move by Macron, because France already has this new virus anyway. And it would have meant that a lot of French shoppers would have been deprived of British exports for 2 or 3 days, and a lot of French lorry drivers would be very upset. And there was no possible reason for it. Nobody else would have thought of such a thing. The idea that a lorry driver is isolated by himself in a cab was carrying a virus and should be tested is a bit stupid. But it was just another piece of grandstanding on behalf of Macron, who's very worried about his re-election prospects.
All right, so Gun, on that point of what happened at the port of Dover, again, I don't want to overstate that, but it just seemed like, for me, because there were so many fatalistic, pessimistic, forecasts about what would have happened had there been a no deal. Do you think that sort of was a mini peek into what may have happened had there not been a deal? And does this necessarily mean that we have prevented such scenarios altogether?
I personally think that it is definitely related. we, at least I think for the time being, definitely such scenes or such occurrences have been prevented. I think the French perhaps wanted to connect it with the negotiation. I mean, nobody knows that for sure. There was also an obvious reason which had to do with a second strain of COVID. So the linkage, is probably up for historians to find out eventually. In the future, we might still see such scenes. I mean, I wouldn't exclude them, even though the deal obviously does prevent them from occurring on the 31st of December and in the early month. But as I said earlier, if there is a sanction mechanism also tied up with that deal, if there is, divergence, and if the mutual trust that exists is broken, then, of course, as Barnier said, it is also possible to have a panel system. There's arbitration. If that fails, then unilateral action may reoccur. But, of course, the deal is done under the assumption that that will not happen. And both sides, I think, went a long way to give reassurances that this should be new beginnings rather than, simply bringing up borders and customs checks.
Okay, so then, Alan, there's a whole talk, right, about Britain's place in just Europe, and I'm not talking about the European Union, but just Europe itself, right, and its relations with the European Union, of course, as a bloc also. Will this be one of mutual respect and, ensuring equality and, good relations between both sides? Because I would think, naturally, obviously through this process, that there have been a lot of negative feelings that have been brought up.
Well, no, I think in future that Britain will treat the European Union with respect. Much the same. It'll become just another country. It'll become like America or Canada, Australia. We'll treat it with the same respect we do these other friends and allies. And there's no reason to assume that we should have any hostile feelings. I think there'll be great relief among Brexiteers that we're now out. But I don't think there's any hostility towards Europeans.
Okay.
I mean, there was hostility towards the system of the European Union, but we're out of that. I mean, the idea that we should harbour any ill will towards French or German, Italians or anybody else seems nonsensical. We will just treat the European Union in future, as I say, like we do any other third state, like America or Canada or Australia, friends, allies, but, a separate country.
Very well. We're also now joined by Keith Rowe, who is a political commentator and campaigner. He's joining us today from Birmingham. Keith, thank you very much for your time today on Christmas Day. Keith, how do you reflect on the deal that's been agreed upon? How do you reflect upon what relations with the European Union will be like going forward?
Well, I think it's a very exciting time for the United Kingdom. I mean, there's an awful lot of the detail, and of course the devil is always in the detail, and there's something like 2,000 pages for us to go through to see exactly what's been agreed. But looking at the details that we've been told so far and the broad outline, from the point of view of the United Kingdom, it seems like there's a very exciting time ahead. I think we'll be dealing with the European Union on a friendly and business-like way. I don't see it being, I heard just the end of the talk from your previous person, and I would agree in many ways. I think there's no hostility. I think there's perhaps a little bit of wariness as to how it's going to work. And from a business point of view, there's going to be some hitches along the way, and there's going to be some learning curve, but that's to be expected. And I think we'll deal with the European Union in a friendly and business-like manner. From the point of view of the United Kingdom trade, this is an incredibly important time and an incredibly exciting time, because not only are we continuing our relationship with the EU and continuing to deal with them on a tariff-free basis, but we're entering into trade deals left, right and centre across the world in a record speed. This is something really exciting. So this is going to give us the chance to buy goods from across the world tariff-free, It's going to help with prices here. It's going to help our global position. And this is something that any business person should be incredibly excited about. This is, if we do this right and the government supports business, this should be a wonderful time. Okay. And we must be buoyant about it.
Keith, if I may, what of the human rights issues which have come up? Because the European Union is this complex web of laws and regulations, right? And a lot of them have to do with human rights and migration, even. And we know that in the lead up to the 31st of December, there was talk about the UK possibly speeding up deportations under, I believe it was if I'm not mistaken, the Dublin Agreement, Durham Agreement, something along those lines was the title of that agreement, where it was allowed to send asylum seekers back to the first EU countries that they may have arrived in and or sought asylum in. All of the above, there are concerns, right, on the part of many experts about whether or not the UK on its own will do the right thing vis-a-vis human rights. What are your thoughts on that?
You're mixing up several different issues there.
Okay.
In terms of human rights law, the United Kingdom has always been a leader in this, and it's always been one of the countries that has respected human rights and allowed refugees in and helped those in need across the world. We're still giving huge sums of money in foreign aid, perhaps too much, and perhaps a lot of that's being wasted. But we, as a country, support human rights. That's very different to the subject that you mixed in with there, which is one of illegal immigration. Now, illegal immigration, even by going by EU law, which we're still governed under until the end of this year, says that any refugee entering the European Union has to claim asylum in the country in which that person lands. So even by EU law, when people arrive in this country from France, supported by France, which is breaking EU law in itself, and they are sending illegal refugees, illegal immigrants rather than refugees, sending illegal immigrants into this country, they're really trying to destabilize our law. They're playing politics with it. And like with any sovereign nation, the United Kingdom is quite entitled to say who comes in and who doesn't come into the country. And that happens with every other sovereign nation across the world. And if we have illegal immigrants that don't go through the right procedures, we are more than entitled to say, sorry, you've got to go back to the point that you started from. That's very different from human rights and refugees. Please don't mix the two up.
All right, Gunter, what thoughts on that vis-a-vis human rights and refugees separately and or as one issue?
Well, I think as far as I know, the deal, as far as cooperation in that area is concerned, does insist that the United Kingdom remains a member of the European Convention of Human Rights and the respective court in Strasbourg, which is different to the European Court of Justice, but it has that sort of overarching reach with regards to human rights. And as long as the UK stays within that system, then insurances are made that it stays also, within its immigration policy, within what continental Europeans would consider acceptable. There's a whole range of issues, I would say, beyond the pure economics, where again there is potential for disagreements between the member states of the European Union and the United Kingdom. And in that area, the United Kingdom will become a third country which will make its own decisions. But of course, there are other international conventions. There's a whole set of international bodies, and there's also the expectation that some of these issues will be addressed in a collaborative manner. So in that respect, I'm quite hopeful that the UK stays within the European Convention of Human Rights, and for that reason will also face potentially, under certain circumstances, proceedings in front of that court for human rights in Strasbourg, if decisions are made that run against the convention. So there is an element of check and balance in that area, and I sincerely hope that that will also be the case in the future.
All right, so then the feeling that one gets then, right, is that we've heard a lot of, and I put this earlier to one of you as well, that there were a lot of very pessimistic headlines, right, coming out, and they're still probably coming out right now as well. I've seen a few already today about what may very well happen now come December 31st and post Brexit altogether, vis-a-vis human rights also, and trade and all of the above. So do you think that almost the UK has proven that outside of the EU, being outside of the EU is not actually that bad a thing? And then does that then mean that a precedent has been set for other EU members who, within their populations, there may be a stir or a feeling that, hey, maybe we can do this too?
Well, I mean, Britain was an independent power for centuries and centuries. She's only been a member of the European Union for 40 years, which weren't very good for us as far as membership was concerned. We got very little out of it. But as I said before, the other country which is very Eurosceptic is France. But the difference between Britain and the other member states of the EU is that we never joined the euro. And these other countries are members of the euro, and it makes it very, very much more difficult for them to leave because they have a common currency. And this is what stopped Greece from leaving when you had the great crisis between 2009 and 2015 in Greece. But it does make it more difficult because these countries can't set their own interest rates and can't devalue. And they're dependent on the goodwill of the European Central Bank and their fellow member states. So for them to leave the European Union would be very much more difficult. But that's not to say they're happy inside the European Union. The Eurozone's in permanent crisis. And as I say, when Macron was asked on British television if the French were given a referendum, how would they vote? He said they would vote to leave. But he said, I'm not giving them a referendum. As I say, they voted out the constitutional treaty. They almost voted down the Maastricht Treaty. The French will be looking at us very carefully because we're very independent-minded. And I think when Britain proves that independence outside the EU is a fairly prosperous thing and an exciting and beneficial thing as far as we're concerned, the French will look on us, and I think the next country to come out will be France, and after that the whole thing will collapse. But there may be an economic crisis over the euro. One's been simmering for a number of years now, and that could collapse the system too.
Okay, so Keith, I'll give you the floor before I let all three of you go. On the subject of just the European Union as a bloc itself, as a bloc of regulations, et cetera, I know that a lot of those regulations were something that the UK had a problem with while it was still, of course, in the EU, and was one of the reasons that played into Brexit referendum going the way it did. Do you think that the EU, as it stands right now, is able to reform itself to fix those problems?
That in the longer term, the answer to that is no. I think they've got so many problems compounding. Dr. Sked drew on one or two of them, such as the currency, the finances of the EU are in a terrible state. Of course, they've just lost their second biggest contributor, which was the United Kingdom. So their finances alone mean that they are going to have some huge arguments. Put that with the dissent that is already appearing from various different countries. And I think that we will be seeing a gradual, which may speed up suddenly, implosion of the EU. And the only thing that I would take maybe some issue with Dr. Sked is that as to whether it's France that wants to leave first, or whether it's Ireland, or whether it's Italy. Yes, they're tied into the euro currency. That is their big problem, and thank God we didn't join. But in the longer term, in its present state, the EU is unsustainable, and we will see that in the coming years.
All right, we'll leave there at that then with Keith, Gunter and Alan speaking to us there from the UK, from Birmingham, Bristol and London respectively, sharing their expertise and thoughts with us on the Brexit deal that has now been agreed upon between the UK and the European Union. What does this mean now for both sides? Has the UK come out on top? Of course, both sides will claim that they've won, as they have already, but certainly concessions were made. The fishing industry in the UK is not happy, and that was, as we know, a point of contention, a sensitive point of contention between the both sides during these negotiations, hard-fought negotiations, mind you. But now that the deal has been agreed upon, now it's about the future. Will the UK be able to ensure its economic progress? Will it be able to ensure the respect of human rights, migrant rights, etc.? Also, as I put to our guests, all of the above, we're fairly optimistic about what is to happen. So we'll have to, again, like I said, wait and see as to how all of this plays out in the UK and the European Union vis-a-vis reforms there that are necessary, according to many member states. I'll be back with the next segment after this break. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. And this segment, we're going to discuss Myanmar and its connection to an Israeli tech company, Gilat Satellite Networks. It has sold technology to the Myanmarese military. Now, human rights groups, a specific human rights group that is in Myanmar, has said that Gilat is complicit in the regime's alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity. A former UN fact finder, in fact, in Myanmar has also said that if the company did, and if of course it's proven that the company did aid and abet crimes of the Myanmar military, that there would be no statute of limitations on that, and that according to international law, the company should be held to account. Let's discuss all of that a bit further. And I'm joined by Simon Billenness, who is Executive Director of the International Campaign for the Rohingya. He's joining us this morning from Washington, D.C. Joining us today from London is Maung, Zarni, who is a fellow of the Genocide Documentation Center, Cambodia and Burmese exiled scholar. He's also a human rights activist. Maung and Simon, thank you both for your time today on Christmas Day. Simon, let me start with you. What do you make of this sort of connection between technology and what the Myanmar military is then doing within its borders?
Well, this is a clear example of corporate complicity in genocide. And, we've, through our No Business with Genocide campaign, we've been targeting companies that are providing aid, assistance, and finance to the Myanmar military through business deals like this. And this is a particularly egregious one. It seems that Gilat has provided equipment for the Myanmar military's propaganda machine, which has been spewing hate speech that was part of their campaign of violence and genocide against the Rohingya.
What are your thoughts about this? I mean, it's interesting that we have this tech company, right? And it's sold this sort of technology. And we know, of course, that the Israelis and the Myanmar government also have fairly good relations.
No, Myanmar and Israel have had an extremely solid ties since the birth of Israel in 1948-49. And I think it is just the tip of the berg, because, in the midst of genocidal killings in Burma, or just months prior to the killings of Rohingyas in 2017, the commander-in-chief of Myanmar, Senior General Maung, was given a red carpet welcome in Israel when he toured Israeli defense industries, looking at different military hardware to buy. And I think it's not just the technological transfer or the other corporate complicity, such as the HSBC and Standard & Chartered 25 million investment or loans to the Burmese companies. But the state of Israel has provided multiple types of support to the Burmese military. The intelligence training, the combat training, and all kinds of training over the last 70 plus years. And so but Israel, it's fair to single out Israel here, but there are also half a dozen countries that have developed very close ties with the Burmese military that stands accused credibly of genocide at the ICJ and in other courts.
Yeah. So Simon, if I may go back to just the example of Israel, because we're speaking about that at this point, and I completely take Maung's point that it's not like it's just the Israelis who have close relations with Myanmar. But on the point of Israel itself, I mean, there is this huge context, right, of the Palestinians as well. And I don't want to completely compare apples and oranges for our viewers either. But do you think that that plays a role in this, where the Israelis have almost, in a sense, learned from their experience with the Palestinians, and they're passing on those sorts of experiences / lessons, if I may even use those terms?
Well, it's certainly very troubling that Israel appears to be using and sharing technology that they've used and developed in their occupation of Palestinian lands. That is definitely true. And I think Maung Zarni really laid out very clearly the long history of ties between, not just between Israel and Myanmar, but between Israel and the Myanmar military. But certainly, there's a lot of other countries that have similar ties to Myanmar and to the Myanmar military, and we mustn't forget those. There have been German and Polish companies that sold equipment to the Myanmar military. The Japanese beer company Kirin is in partnerships with the Myanmar military in 2 breweries in Burma, and also jewelry companies all around the world, including luxury jeweler Harry Winston, which is owned by Swatch of Switzerland, have been buying gems mined in Burma that greatly profit the Myanmar military. So there's a lot of collaboration from many different countries and many different companies with the Myanmar military. And, we're focused on the most egregious cases, and we're focused on the companies where we, at the International Campaign for the Rohingya, can mobilize people to use their consumer pressure, shareholder pressure, and social media to put pressure on these companies to end these business ties with the Myanmar military.
So then, Maung, if I may just ask, the very direct question, where then does this leave the Rohingya, right, in that entire issue? Is it that the world has simply been paying lip service to that issue, and behind the scenes it doesn't really think that it's as important, and that it just wants these sorts of economic ties, because obviously all of the above companies and countries are making some sort of money off of these relations?
If I may, to quantify, I think like a 10% seriousness to want to end what clearly is international state crime. And genocides and crimes against the humanities are not covered by sovereignty. So the sovereignty has its own limits, and 90% is essentially business as usual. I mean, we're looking at India, Japan, South Korea providing all kinds of support, development aid by the billions, military to military cooperation. But that's just, not just Israel and Asian the economies and governments that are in bed with Myanmar, but the United States itself, USAID, the British government, they all pay lip service to end the genocide, or if they don't use the word genocide, end these atrocities against Rohingyas. But the most troubling thing to me is like since the or even before the Genocide Convention was brought into existence in 1948. The term genocide was created in the 1930s, and just before the Nazis started exterminating the Jews and others from Nazi-occupied Europe. There is a pattern of different states, governments and corporations, starting with like German corporations at Auschwitz. And so this pattern is repeated everywhere. Everywhere there are cases of mass atrocities, you will find this corporate complicity and state enablers, whatever the name of the perpetrators. And so this is, very well established pattern where the international community so-called pay lip service, whether they're Jews at Auschwitz or other places. The world does not seem to care. That's why it's really important that the corporate accountability campaigns, that Simon's involved in, and also Justice for Myanmar, get media proper coverage and support worldwide from the citizens around the world if the governments are failing.
Right. Simon, if I may play devil's advocate for just a moment, I'm just throwing this argument out there for the sake of throwing it out there. But, Aung San Suu Kyi, she had a lot of promise not too long ago, right, where she had a lot of support around the world. She certainly did go through some harrowing things in her life, without a doubt. But then, do you think that in some ways these relations, especially on the part of more of the Western countries, the democracies, quote unquote, as we may call them, are because they were hoping that the change will come, but it'll be a lot slower than maybe what all of us are expecting in Myanmar vis-a-vis governance, et cetera?
Well, I think that many people, myself included, projected onto Aung San Suu Kyi what we wanted to see. When we campaigned endlessly for her release from house arrest numerous times. But now that she's in power, or at least, has a certain degree of power, her autocratic and nationalistic feelings and actions are becoming very clear. I mean, for instance, Aung San Suu Kyi could, if she wanted to, release over 100 prisoners of conscience that are being held in Myanmar. She has not done so. Her party has a majority, an absolute majority, in the Myanmar parliament. She could repeal all the discriminatory race and religion laws that are used against religious and ethnic minorities, but she has chosen not to do so. She went to The Hague and defended the Myanmar army on charges of genocide. So all of that is on her now. But yes, I think a number of countries and a number of politicians still have residual optimism in Aung San Suu Kyi, which I think is now, clearly contradicted by the facts of her rule.
And we appreciate both Maung and Simon for their time today, and of course for taking their time out on Christmas Day, no less, to share their expertise with us on this very important topic, right? The connection between an Israeli technology company and the Myanmar military. As both of our guests said, it's not like it's just Israel and Myanmar whose relations are disturbing, considering the actions of the Myanmar military towards the Rohingya people, as well as other, mind you, groups in the country. Also, human rights violations, alleged war crimes, crimes against humanity. The list is quite endless. Even the evidence is out there for many who have already viewed it and want to look for it. Is it about hoping that the process towards democratization is occurring through Aung San Suu Kyi's person? Is that even possible within the system as it currently stands? A lot of questions, of course, to be asked about this at this time. I'll leave it there for now. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.